Behind the false wall of a forgotten basement lay rows of gleaming gold bars and antique coins worth over $25 million, alongside weathered documents that would reveal the secret of one of Colorado's most mysterious disappearances from the 1960s. The discovery that would transform a struggling single father and his teenage son from the brink of homelessness into guardians of a treasure that had been waiting 57 years to change someone's life forever. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another life-changing discovery that will leave you speechless. The mountain air of Woodland Park, Colorado, carried the scent of pine and possibility when David Chen first laid eyes on the weathered log cabin that would become his family's sanctuary and ultimately the key to their salvation. It was March 2024, and David was making the most desperate gamble of his life, using his last $18,000 to purchase a seemingly worthless property that everyone else had deemed unsalvageable. I'm David Chen, and this is the story of how my 16-year-old son Marcus and I went from sleeping in our car to discovering one of the most significant treasure finds in Colorado history, hidden beneath the floorboards of a cabin that real estate agents had been trying to sell for 3 years without success. My journey to that moment began in 2019, when I was living what I thought was my perfect life. I had been a software engineer at a thriving tech startup in Denver, earning $95,000 a year and raising my son Marcus as a single father after my wife Sarah passed away from cancer when Marcus was only 8 years old. Sarah had been my high school sweetheart, a brilliant teacher who filled our home with laughter and learning. Her death shattered my world, but Marcus became my anchor, a brilliant, curious kid who inherited his mother's love of history and my analytical mind. For 3 years after Sarah's passing, I managed to maintain stability for both of us. Our suburban Denver home was modest but comfortable, and I thought I was providing Marcus with the security and opportunities that Sarah would have wanted for him. Marcus was thriving academically, particularly in his history classes, where he would spend hours researching obscure historical events and mysteries. His teachers consistently praised his analytical thinking and his ability to connect seemingly unrelated historical facts into compelling narratives. But stability can vanish overnight in ways you never expect. The first crack in our foundation appeared in late 2022 when the tech startup I worked for began struggling with funding issues. The company had grown too fast during the pandemic boom and was now facing the harsh reality of a contracting market. Initially, they cut our benefits and froze salaries. Then they began laying off employees in waves, starting with the newest hires and gradually working their way up to more senior positions. I had been with the company for 4 years and felt relatively secure, but the technology sector was experiencing unprecedented instability. Companies that had seemed unshakable were collapsing within months, and experienced engineers were competing for a shrinking number of positions. When my layoff notice came in February 2023, it included a severance package that would cover our expenses for 3 months, time I was confident would be sufficient to find new employment. I was wrong. The job market for software engineers had become saturated with talented professionals from failed startups, and companies were being extremely selective about new hires. Interview after interview resulted in rejection letters citing overqualification, budget constraints, or simply no response at all. My savings account, which had seemed substantial when I was employed, began shrinking at an alarming rate as I struggled to maintain our mortgage payments, utilities, and Marcus's school expenses. By October 2023, I had exhausted my severance pay and burned through most of our savings. The unemployment benefits I was receiving covered barely half of our monthly expenses, and I found myself making increasingly desperate choices about which bills to pay and which to defer. Marcus, who had always been mature for his age, began working part-time at a local grocery store after school, insisting on contributing his earnings to our household expenses despite my protests. The stress was taking a devastating toll on both of us. Marcus's grades, which had always been exceptional, began declining as he worried about our future and tried to balance work with his studies. I found myself lying awake at night, running through scenarios and calculations, trying to identify solutions to problems that seemed to multiply faster than I could address them. The house that Sarah and I had bought together, the place where we had planned to raise Marcus and build our future, was slipping away from us. In December 2023, I received the foreclosure notice that forced me to confront the reality I had been avoiding. We had 60 days to either catch up on our mortgage payments or vacate the property. With no employment prospects and our savings completely depleted, I had to make the heartbreaking decision to sell the house before the bank took it from us. We managed to find a buyer who could close quickly, but after paying off the mortgage and associated fees, we were left with only $23,000, everything we had in the world.
Marcus and I moved into a cramped studio apartment in a less expensive part of Denver, but even the reduced rent was straining our limited resources. I took whatever work I could find: freelance web development projects, food delivery driving, even manual labor jobs that left me exhausted but brought in barely enough to keep us housed and fed. Marcus continued working at the grocery store while maintaining his studies, but I could see the stress affecting his health and his optimism about the future. The lowest point came in February 2024, when our landlord informed us that our apartment complex was being sold and all tenants needed to vacate by the end of the month. The new owners planned to renovate the building and convert it to luxury condominiums, pricing out all the current residents. With rental prices in Denver continuing to skyrocket and our credit damaged by late payments during the foreclosure process, we couldn't qualify for another apartment. For 3 nights, Marcus and I slept in our 2018 Honda Civic in a Walmart parking lot, keeping our remaining possessions in a storage unit and trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine while searching desperately for affordable housing. Marcus continued attending school, using the gym facilities to shower, and never letting his friends know about our situation. His resilience and determination in the face of such uncertainty reminded me daily of Sarah's strength and made me more determined than ever to find a solution. It was during those dark nights in the car that I began researching alternative housing options outside of Denver. The high cost of urban living had priced us out completely, but rural Colorado offered possibilities that I had never previously considered. I spent hours on real estate websites looking for properties we could afford with our remaining $23,000, knowing that we needed to find something quickly before our situation became completely unsustainable. Most of the properties in our price range were either mobile homes in questionable condition or raw land without utilities or structures. But one listing caught my attention: a log cabin on 2 acres in Woodland Park, Colorado, listed for $18,000. The property had been on the market for 3 years with multiple price reductions, and the listing photos showed a structure that looked more like a demolition project than a potential home. The cabin had been built in 1967 as a summer retreat by a Denver businessman named Harold Whitmore, but it had been abandoned for over a decade after Harold's death in 2012. His children, who lived out of state, had been trying to sell the property, but found no buyers willing to take on the extensive repairs that would be necessary to make it habitable. The roof leaked, the plumbing was non-functional, and the electrical system was so outdated that it would require complete replacement. But the property had several advantages that outweighed its obvious problems. It was located in a beautiful mountain setting with pine trees and mountain views. The structure was solid log construction that, while neglected, had good bones. Most importantly, it was something we could afford, and ownership would provide us with stability and the possibility of gradually improving our situation through sweat equity rather than rental payments to someone else. Marcus was initially skeptical when I showed him the listing photos. "Dad, that place looks like it's about to fall down," he said, examining images of peeling paint, broken windows, and a porch that was sagging dramatically on one side. "Are you sure we can make it livable?" "I think we can," I replied, though I wasn't entirely certain myself. It's going to take a lot of work, but it's ours if we buy it. No more landlords, no more rent increases, no more wondering if we'll have a place to live next month. And you've always been interested in history. This cabin has stories to tell. The property inspection revealed the extent of the challenges we would face. The roof had multiple leaks that had caused water damage to the interior walls. The kitchen and bathroom fixtures were from the 1960s and would need complete replacement. The heating system was an old wood stove that would require significant chimney repairs before it could be safely used. The electrical wiring was so outdated that insurance companies would likely refuse coverage until it was completely updated. But the inspector also noted that the log structure itself was remarkably solid. The foundation was stable, and the logs showed minimal rot despite decades of neglect. He said, "This cabin was built to last. It's going to need significant work, but you're starting with a fundamentally sound structure. With time and effort, you could have a really nice place here." On March 15, 2024, I signed the purchase documents that transferred ownership of the Woodland Park cabin to our family. Using $18,000 of our remaining savings for the purchase and closing costs, left us with only $5,000 for repairs and living expenses. But we finally had a home that no one could take away from us. The first night we spent in the cabin was both exciting and terrifying. We had sleeping bags on the floor of what would eventually become our living room, a battery-powered lantern for light, and a cooler with sandwiches for dinner. Water was available from a working well, but we had to boil it because the pipes hadn't been used in years. Marcus, who had been stressed and withdrawn during our weeks of homelessness, seemed to come alive as he explored the cabin and began planning how we could transform it. "Dad, look at this," he said, examining the construction details of the log walls. "This place was built by someone who really knew what they were doing. The craftsmanship is incredible, even after all these years of neglect."
Over the following weeks, we developed a systematic approach to making the cabin livable while stretching our limited budget as far as possible. I took on freelance programming projects that I could complete using the public Wi-Fi at the Woodland Park Library, while Marcus researched repair techniques and helped with physical improvements after school. We started with the most essential repairs, patching the roof leaks, getting the plumbing functional, and making the electrical system safe enough for basic lighting and appliances. The work was exhausting and sometimes discouraging, but it was also bringing us closer together and giving us both a sense of purpose that had been missing during our months of crisis. Marcus approached each repair project like a historical research challenge, spending hours online learning about log cabin restoration techniques and the proper methods for preserving historical structures. His attention to detail and analytical approach proved invaluable as we worked to maintain the cabin's character while updating its functionality. By June 2024, we had made remarkable progress. The roof was watertight, we had hot water and basic electrical service, and the main living areas were comfortable enough for year-round habitation. Marcus had transformed the smaller bedroom into a study space where he could focus on his schoolwork and continue his historical research projects. I had set up a basic office in the loft area where I could work on programming contracts and manage our increasingly stable finances. The isolation of mountain living had initially concerned me, but it was proving beneficial for both of us. Marcus was thriving in the Woodland Park school system, where smaller class sizes allowed teachers to recognize his talents and provide individualized attention. His history teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Rodriguez, was particularly encouraging of his research interests and had begun assigning him independent projects that challenged his analytical abilities. Our financial situation was stabilizing as well. The absence of rent payments allowed my freelance income to cover our basic expenses while gradually building up our savings for additional improvements. We were eating better, sleeping better, and for the first time in over a year, we were planning for the future rather than simply surviving from day to day. But the cabin still held secrets that we hadn't discovered, and it was Marcus's insatiable curiosity about the property's history that would lead us to the discovery that would transform our lives forever. His fascination with Harold Whitmore, the original owner, had begun as a simple interest in the cabin's background, but was gradually developing into a comprehensive research project about the area's history during the 1960s and 1970s. As summer turned to fall, Marcus spent increasing amounts of time investigating historical records, property documents, and local newspaper archives, trying to piece together the complete story of our cabin and its previous inhabitants. What he discovered would soon lead us to realize that Harold Whitmore had been far more than a simple businessman seeking a mountain retreat, and that our seemingly modest cabin contained secrets that had been waiting over half a century to be revealed. The foundation we were building through hard work and determination was about to reveal that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for those brave enough to dig deep enough to find them. The bitter February winds of 2025 howled through the Vermont mountains with a ferocity that seemed to mirror the chaos engulfing our carefully rebuilt lives. What had started as our year of recovery and growth was rapidly transforming into the most devastating crisis our small family had ever faced. 3 separate disasters were converging simultaneously, each one amplifying the others in ways that threatened to destroy not just our financial stability, but our very ability to remain in the cottage that had become our sanctuary. The first blow came without warning on February 14, 2025, in the form of a phone call that would shatter the peace we had worked so hard to establish. I was in my attic office working on a particularly challenging marketing campaign for a sustainable fashion startup when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professional but grave, belonging to Dr. Amanda Mitchell from Vermont Medical Center. "Ms. Rosewood, I'm calling about your mother, Patricia. She's been brought to our emergency department after suffering what appears to be a severe stroke. You're listed as her emergency contact." The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother, Patricia Rosewood, was only 63 years old and had always been the picture of health and independence. She lived alone in her small apartment in Montpelier, working as a librarian and maintaining an active lifestyle that included hiking, gardening, and volunteering at the local animal shelter. The idea that she could be lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life seemed impossible to comprehend. "I'll be there immediately," I managed to say, my hands already shaking as I reached for my car keys. The drive to the hospital felt endless, my mind racing with worry and the practical implications of what was happening. Sophia was at school, and I had no way to reach her immediately. The marketing project I was working on had a deadline in 2 days, and missing it would mean losing an $8,000 contract that represented a significant portion of our monthly income. But none of that mattered compared to the fear that I might lose my mother just as our lives were finally stabilizing.
Dr. Mitchell met me in the intensive care unit, her expression serious, but not without hope. "Your mother suffered a significant ischemic stroke, which means a blood clot blocks circulation to a portion of her brain. We were able to administer clot-busting medication within the critical time window, but the extent of the damage won't be clear for several days." Mom was unconscious, connected to multiple machines that monitored her vital signs and provided the support her body needed while her brain began the slow process of healing. The sight of her lying so still and vulnerable was heartbreaking. This was the woman who had single-handedly raised me after my father left when I was 12, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for my college education, who had been my rock of support during Michael's death and throughout our recent struggles. "The next 72 hours are critical," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Stroke recovery is unpredictable, but her age and previous good health are positive factors. However, I need to prepare you for the possibility that she may require extensive rehabilitation and long-term care." The financial implications of Mom's condition became clear over the following days as I met with hospital social workers and insurance specialists. While her basic medical care would be covered by Medicare, the rehabilitation services she would need could cost thousands of dollars per month. If she required long-term assisted living or skilled nursing care, the expenses could easily reach $6,000 to $8,000 monthly, far beyond what her modest retirement savings and Social Security benefits could cover. Worse yet, Mom's apartment lease would need to be terminated and her belongings would need to be moved and stored. She had been living independently for years, but that independence was now gone, possibly forever. As her only family member, the responsibility for her care and support would fall entirely on my shoulders at precisely the moment when our own finances were just beginning to stabilize.
For 5 days, I maintained a vigil at the hospital while trying to manage my work responsibilities remotely. Sophia took over many of the household duties, preparing meals and maintaining the cottage while dealing with her own anxiety about her grandmother's condition. The stress was affecting both of us, but we were determined to support each other through this crisis just as we had survived homelessness and financial ruin. On February 19th, Mom finally regained consciousness, but the damage from the stroke was immediately apparent. The left side of her body was partially paralyzed, her speech was slurred and difficult to understand, and she seemed confused about where she was and what had happened to her. The woman who had been fiercely independent and intellectually sharp was now struggling with basic cognitive functions. "Isabella," she whispered, her voice barely audible and distorted by the neurological damage. "What happened to me?" "You had a stroke, Mom, but you're going to be okay," I said, taking her hand and trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "The doctors say you're going to recover, but it's going to take time and hard work." The rehabilitation process began immediately, with physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech pathologists working with Mom for hours each day. The progress was slow and often frustrating, both for her and for our family. Simple tasks that she had performed automatically for decades, speaking clearly, walking, even eating, now required enormous effort and concentration. But even as we grappled with Mom's medical crisis, a second disaster was developing that would soon overshadow everything else. On February 25th, just as Mom was being transferred from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility, I received a certified letter from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation that would transform our cottage restoration project into a potential catastrophe. The letter informed me that our property had been selected for inclusion in a comprehensive environmental assessment related to potential groundwater contamination in the Willowbrook area. According to the notice, industrial activities conducted in the region during the 1960s and 1970s had possibly resulted in soil and water contamination that posed risks to public health and environmental safety. Property owners in the designated assessment area are required to provide access for environmental testing and may be subject to remediation requirements depending on the findings of the investigation. The letter stated in bureaucratic language that barely concealed the potential for disaster. Failure to comply with assessment requirements may result in fines, legal action, and restrictions on property use. The implications were staggering. Remediation could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, far beyond our ability to pay. If contamination was discovered on our property, we might be forced to relocate while cleanup efforts were conducted. In the worst-case scenario, the property could be declared uninhabitable, making our cottage worthless and leaving us homeless once again. I immediately called the number provided in the letter and spoke with Janet Morrison, an environmental compliance officer, who explained the assessment process in more detail. We're particularly concerned about properties that were used for industrial or commercial activities during the 1960s and 1970s. Historical records indicate that several businesses in your area may have engaged in activities that could have resulted in heavy metal contamination or chemical pollution.
"But our cottage was just a private residence," I protested. "It was built as a weekend retreat for a businessman from Boston. There was never any industrial activity here." "That's what we need to determine," Morrison replied. "The preliminary assessment will involve soil sampling, groundwater testing, and a comprehensive review of historical land use. If we find evidence of contamination, the property owner is responsible for cleanup costs under Vermont environmental statutes." The environmental assessment team arrived at our cottage on March 3rd. Transforming our peaceful rural property into something resembling a scientific research station. Technicians in protective equipment began taking soil samples from multiple locations around the cottage, installing monitoring wells to test groundwater quality, and using sophisticated instruments to detect the presence of heavy metals and chemical contaminants. Sophia watched the proceedings with a mixture of fascination and concern. "Mom, what if they find something terrible in our soil? Could we lose the cottage after everything we've done to fix it up?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I admitted, watching the technicians carefully catalog soil samples that could determine our future.
but we've survived worse things than this. Whatever happens, we'll figure out a way to handle it." The assessment process was scheduled to take several weeks, during which time we would be living under a cloud of uncertainty about whether our home would be declared safe for habitation. The stress was compounded by the fact that I couldn't focus properly on my marketing work while worrying about environmental contamination, Mom's medical bills, and the possibility of another forced relocation. But the worst was yet to come. On March 8th, while I was visiting Mom at the rehabilitation facility and Sophia was at school, our cottage was burglarized in broad daylight. The thieves had apparently been watching our routines and knew that the property would be unoccupied during weekday afternoons. They had broken in through a rear window and systematically searched the cottage for valuable items. The financial loss was devastating. They had stolen my laptop computer, which contained months of work on various marketing projects, as well as all of my client files and business records. My camera equipment, which I used for marketing photography, was gone. Sophia's laptop, which she needed for her schoolwork, had been taken along with her tablet and the small television we had recently purchased for the living room. But the emotional impact was even worse than the financial loss. The cottage that had represented safety and security after months of homelessness no longer felt like a sanctuary. The thieves had gone through our personal belongings, leaving drawers open and papers scattered across the floor. They had violated the space where we had worked so hard to rebuild our lives and restore our sense of stability. "I can't believe someone would do this to us," Sophia said, tears streaming down her face as she surveyed the damage when she returned from school. "We don't have anything valuable. Why would they take the little we do have?" The police investigation revealed that our cottage had been targeted as part of a series of daytime burglaries affecting rural properties in the area. The thieves apparently assumed that country homes would contain valuable antiques, cash, or other easily stolen items. Officer David Chen, who processed the crime scene, explained that the chances of recovering our stolen property were minimal. These kinds of thieves usually fence electronics and other portable items within 24 hours. They're likely already out of state by now. Your insurance should cover the replacement costs, but it will take time to process the claim. The insurance situation proved to be another source of stress and disappointment. Our homeowner's policy had a $2,500 deductible for theft claims, and the total value of our stolen property was only about $4,200. After paying the deductible and waiting for the claim to be processed, we would receive approximately $1,700, not nearly enough to replace everything that had been taken. More problematically, the insurance company required us to install a security system and upgrade our door and window locks before they would maintain coverage on the property. The cost of these security improvements would be at least $3,000, money we simply didn't have while dealing with Mom's medical expenses and the uncertainty of the environmental assessment. The burglary had another devastating consequence that became apparent only gradually. The thieves had apparently been in the cottage for several hours, and they had damaged some of the restoration projects that Sophia and I had completed over the past months. Water pipes had been disturbed during their search, causing a small leak that had damaged the hardwood flooring we had recently refinished. Paint had been scraped off walls where they had moved furniture looking for hidden valuables. The cumulative effect of these three crises, Mom's stroke and ongoing medical expenses, the environmental assessment threatening our property, and the burglary that had violated our sense of security, was creating a perfect storm that threatened to destroy everything we had worked to achieve. Our carefully managed finances were being overwhelmed by unexpected expenses and lost income. I found myself lying awake at night, running through increasingly desperate scenarios as our situation deteriorated day by day. The marketing clients I had been working with were becoming impatient with delays caused by my divided attention between Mom's care and our cottage problems. 2 major contracts had been canceled when I missed deadlines, representing a loss of over $12,000 in expected income.
Mom's medical expenses were mounting faster than I had anticipated. The rehabilitation facility was costing $4,800 per month, and insurance was only covering a portion of the costs. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy sessions were additional expenses that would continue for months or possibly years. The doctors were optimistic about her eventual recovery, but they couldn't provide any guarantees about the timeline or the extent of improvement we could expect. The environmental assessment was producing preliminary results that were deeply concerning. While the technicians hadn't found evidence of widespread contamination, they had discovered elevated levels of certain heavy metals in soil samples taken near the cottage foundation. Janet Morrison explained that additional testing would be required to determine whether these metal concentrations posed health risks or required remediation. "We're seeing levels of lead and mercury that are above normal background concentrations," she told me during a phone call that sent chills down my spine. "This could be natural geological variation, or it could indicate historical industrial activity that wasn't properly documented. We'll need to do more extensive testing to determine the source and extent of the contamination." The possibility that our cottage might be sitting on contaminated soil raised terrifying questions about whether we had been exposing ourselves to health risks during our months of restoration work. Had we been breathing contaminated dust? Had Sophia been exposed to dangerous chemicals during her historical research explorations around the property? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. By mid-March, our financial situation had deteriorated to the point where I was having to choose which bills to pay each month. The cottage mortgage, Mom's medical expenses, and basic living costs were consuming more than my reduced income could cover. I had been forced to withdraw money from our small emergency fund to cover essential expenses, and that safety net was disappearing rapidly. Sophia, who had been my strongest supporter throughout all our previous challenges, was beginning to show signs of severe stress. Her grades were suffering as she worried about her grandmother's condition and our family's future. She had nightmares about the burglary and was afraid to be alone in the cottage. The historical research that had once excited her now seemed pointless in the face of our immediate survival concerns. "Mom, what if we lose the cottage?" she asked me one evening as we sat in our living room surrounded by the signs of our ongoing struggle to repair the damage from the burglary. "What if the environmental people say we can't live here anymore? What if we end up homeless again?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I admitted, feeling the weight of my failure to protect her from uncertainty and fear. "But I promise you that we'll find a way through this, just like we always have." But privately, I was beginning to doubt whether we could survive this perfect storm of crises. The cottage that had represented hope and stability was becoming a source of anxiety and financial drain. The life we had worked so hard to rebuild was crumbling around us, and I could see no clear path to recovery. The environmental assessment team had expanded their investigation to include more extensive soil testing and historical research into previous land use patterns. They were particularly interested in the period during the late 1960s when Theodore Blackthorne owned the property, asking detailed questions about any evidence of unusual activities or construction projects during that time. "We're trying to understand whether any commercial or industrial activities were conducted on this property that might not have been properly documented," explained Dr. Sarah Winters, a soil contamination specialist who had joined the assessment team. "Sometimes private individuals engaged in activities that would be considered environmentally hazardous by today's standards, but which weren't regulated at the time." Sophia's historical research suddenly took on new significance as the environmental team became interested in her discoveries about Theodore Blackthorne's mysterious activities during the 1960s. The references she had found to unusual construction work and heavy truck traffic could potentially explain the elevated metal concentrations in our soil. If Theodore Blackthorne was involved in any kind of industrial processing or storage activities here, that could account for the contamination we're detecting, Dr. Winters told us. "Do you have any information about what kind of business activities he was conducting here?" The irony was crushing.
Sophia's passionate historical research, which had been a source of joy and intellectual stimulation during our cottage restoration, was now potentially providing evidence that could force us to abandon our home. The more we learned about Theodore Blackthorne's activities, the more convinced the environmental team became that significant contamination might be present on our property. As March progressed, the mounting pressure from these multiple crises was taking a severe toll on both Sophia and me. We were struggling to maintain our daily routines while dealing with constant uncertainty about our future. The cottage that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a trap, potentially contaminated and certainly no longer secure after the burglary.
I found myself questioning every decision I had made over the past year. Had I been foolish to purchase a property without understanding its environmental history? Had I put Sophia at risk by moving us to an isolated location where we were vulnerable to crime? Had I been irresponsible to take on a restoration project that was now proving to be more complex and dangerous than I had realized? The weight of single parenthood had never felt heavier. Every decision affected not just my own future, but Sophia's education, her health, and her ability to trust that I could provide the stability and security she needed. The memory of our nights sleeping in the car was still fresh enough to remind us both how quickly a parent's security could disappear. But it was during this darkest period, when our situation seemed hopeless and our options appeared exhausted, that Sophia's historical detective instincts would lead us to the discovery that would transform our understanding of both our property and our possibilities. The environmental investigation that threatened to destroy our home was about to reveal secrets that Theodore Blackthorne had hidden for over 50 years. Secrets that would prove our cottage was far more valuable than anyone had ever imagined. As we faced the possibility of losing everything we had worked to rebuild, we had no idea that the answers to our problems lay buried beneath our feet, waiting for the right combination of curiosity, desperation, and determination to bring them into the light. The phone call that would change everything came at 8:47 p.m. on March 22nd, just as Sophia and I were reviewing the latest stack of medical bills for Mom's rehabilitation facility and trying to calculate how many more weeks we could afford her care. The March wind was howling outside our cottage, rattling the newly installed security windows and reminding us of how vulnerable we had become since the burglary 3 weeks earlier. I almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number with the area code 802, assuming it was another collection agency or insurance company calling about one of our mounting debts. But something made me pick up the phone. Perhaps the same instinct that had led us to this cottage in the first place. Ms. Rosewood, this is Dr. Eleanor Whitfield from the Vermont Historical Preservation Society, said a crisp, professional voice with a slight New England accent. I hope I'm not calling too late, but I've been conducting research on unusual financial transactions during the 1960s banking reforms, and your property appears to be connected to a case that we've been investigating for nearly 30 years. I glanced at Sophia, who looked up from her homework with immediate interest. Any mention of historical research always captured her attention, but given our current circumstances, I was skeptical of anyone claiming to have information about our property that could somehow be relevant to our situation. I'm sorry, Dr. Whitfield, but I think you may have the wrong property. We're dealing with some serious issues right now, and historical research isn't really our priority. Actually, I believe I have exactly the right property, Dr. Whitfield said, her voice taking on a note of excitement. I've been studying unusual banking activities during the economic turbulence of the late 1960s, particularly cases involving private individuals who may have been involved in unauthorized precious metals transactions. Your property was owned during that period by Theodore Blackthorne, who appears in several federal investigation files that were only declassified last year. Sophia immediately moved closer to the phone, her eyes wide with interest.
The name Theodore Blackthorne had become central to her historical research over the past months, but she had been unable to find clear information about his business activities or why he had abandoned the cottage so suddenly. "What kind of investigations?" I asked, my skepticism beginning to give way to curiosity despite our desperate circumstances. "Federal Treasury investigations into possible illegal gold hoarding and currency manipulation," Dr. Whitfield explained. The late 1960s were a period of extreme monetary instability, with the government attempting to maintain the gold standard while dealing with massive fiscal pressures from the Vietnam War. There were several cases of private individuals and small businesses attempting to profit from currency fluctuations by hoarding gold and silver. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Theodore Blackthorne appears in Treasury Department files as a person of interest in connection with the disappearance of a significant shipment of gold coins and bullion that went missing during a transfer between Federal Reserve banks in 1968. The case was never solved, and Blackthorne was never charged, but he disappeared from public records shortly after the investigation began. My heart started beating faster as I began to understand the implications of what Dr. Whitfield was suggesting. "Are you saying that there might be stolen gold hidden somewhere on our property?" "I'm saying that the circumstances surrounding Blackthorne's activities, the timing of his disappearance, and the location of your property create a very interesting historical puzzle," she replied carefully. "I've secured a federal grant to investigate potential sites related to this particular case. If your property contains evidence connected to the missing Federal Reserve shipment, the investigation could qualify for substantial historical preservation funding." The mention of substantial funding immediately captured my attention. With Mom's medical bills mounting and our cottage potentially threatened by environmental contamination, any source of financial assistance deserved serious consideration, regardless of how unlikely it might seem. "What kind of investigation are we talking about, and what would it mean for our living situation?" I asked, trying to balance hope with practical concerns. "I'd like to meet with you in person to explain the details," Dr. Whitfield said. "I have historical documents, Treasury Department files, and geological surveys that I think will be very revealing. Would it be possible for me to visit your cottage tomorrow? I could show you exactly why I believe your property might be far more historically significant than anyone has realized." Sophia was nodding enthusiastically, clearly excited by the possibility of solving the mystery that had fascinated her for months. Even given our desperate circumstances, the idea that our cottage might contain secrets that could provide both historical significance and financial relief was too intriguing to dismiss. "Dr. Whitfield, we'd be very interested in meeting with you," I said, making the decision that would set in motion the most extraordinary discovery of our lives. "How about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? I can give you directions to the cottage." After ending the call, Sophia was practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, this could be exactly what we've been looking for. All my research about Theodore Blackthorne, the mysterious construction activities, the sudden abandonment of the cottage, it all makes sense if he was involved in some kind of federal investigation." "Let's not get our hopes up too much," I cautioned, though I felt a spark of optimism for the first time in weeks. "But if there's any possibility that this could help with our financial situation, we need to explore it." Dr. Eleanor Whitfield arrived at our cottage the next morning, driving a black Range Rover loaded with sophisticated equipment, boxes of historical documents, and what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar units. She was a tall woman in her late 40s with silver-streaked auburn hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of our property as she parked near the cottage entrance. Her appearance was professionally casual: khaki field pants, hiking boots, and a photographer's vest with multiple pockets containing various instruments and measuring devices.
but her demeanor conveyed the confidence of someone who had made significant discoveries before and was accustomed to convincing skeptical property owners to cooperate with her research. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice," she said, as Sophia and I welcomed her into our kitchen. "I know you're dealing with serious challenges right now, so I want to be completely transparent about both the potential benefits and the requirements of what I'm proposing." She opened a leather document case and spread out a collection of maps, photographs, and official documents that immediately captured our attention. The centerpiece was a declassified Treasury Department file dated October 1968 that detailed the disappearance of a Federal Reserve shipment containing gold coins and bullion worth approximately $3.2 million in 1968 currency. This file was declassified last year through a Freedom of Information Act request. It reveals a previously unknown aspect of the Treasury investigation that focused on possible locations where the missing shipment might have been hidden, rather than simply stolen and sold. Your cottage is identified in these documents as location VT47, private residence with unusual construction characteristics and potential underground storage facilities. The phrase underground storage facilities sent chills down my spine. Sophia's research had suggested that the cottage was supposed to have a basement according to the original architectural plans, but we had never found access to a lower level. "Are you suggesting that Theodore Blackthorne knew about this missing shipment when he was building our cottage?" Sophia asked, her analytical mind immediately grasping the implications. "That's one possibility, but there's another explanation that might be even more significant. Based on the Treasury files and the timeline of events, I believe Theodore Blackthorne may have been the person responsible for hiding the Federal Reserve shipment, possibly under direct instructions from government officials who were trying to prevent a monetary crisis during a period of extreme economic instability." She showed us a series of photographs and documents that painted a picture of the chaotic financial situation during the late 1960s. The United States was struggling to maintain the gold standard while funding the Vietnam War, and there were serious concerns about international confidence in the American dollar. Several federal agencies had developed contingency plans for protecting gold reserves in case of economic collapse or foreign intervention. The missing shipment wasn't necessarily stolen in the traditional sense. Treasury records suggest it may have been deliberately relocated to secure locations as part of an emergency financial stabilization program. Theodore Blackthorne's import-export business provided perfect cover for someone who is secretly working with federal authorities to hide monetary assets. The documents she showed us included shipping manifests, Treasury Department correspondence, and geological surveys that had been conducted in our area during 1968 and 1969. Most intriguingly, there were references to specialized construction projects and secure storage installations that matched the unusual construction activities that Sophia's research had uncovered. "What I find most compelling about your site," she pointed to a detailed map of our property, "is that satellite imagery from 1968 shows evidence of significant excavation work around your cottage, including what appears to be the installation of underground structures that don't match the original building plans." She pulled out a tablet computer and showed us ground-penetrating radar images from other sites she had investigated. The technology could reveal buried structures, metal objects, and soil disturbances without requiring excavation, providing a non-invasive way to determine whether our cottage concealed hidden storage areas. "Based on the Treasury files and the physical evidence, I believe there's a strong possibility that a substantial portion of the missing Federal Reserve shipment is hidden somewhere on your property, most likely in an underground vault or storage chamber that was constructed during Theodore Blackthorne's ownership." The implications were staggering. If Dr. Whitfield was correct, our cottage might contain millions of dollars worth of gold and silver that had been hidden for over 50 years. Even accounting for inflation and changes in precious metals values, such a discovery could completely transform our financial situation and provide resources far beyond anything we had ever imagined. Dr. Whitfield, what exactly are you proposing? I asked, needing to understand the practical aspects before allowing myself to hope. I'd like to conduct a systematic investigation of your property using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive archaeological techniques, she replied. If the results indicate the presence of underground structures or significant metal deposits, we would proceed to more detailed investigation and potentially a careful archaeological excavation. All expenses would be covered by my federal grant, and any discoveries would be documented according to historical preservation standards. The timeline she proposed was ambitious but manageable. The initial radar mapping could be completed within 1 week, providing preliminary results without disrupting our daily routines or the ongoing environmental assessment. If the results justified further investigation, the excavation phase could begin immediately, potentially providing answers to our financial crisis within a matter of weeks. Sophia was clearly excited by the prospect of finally solving the mystery that had captured her imagination for months. "Mom, this could explain everything! The missing basement, Theodore Blackthorne's sudden disappearance, even why the environmental people are finding unusual metal concentrations in our soil." Her observation was remarkably insightful. If there really was a hidden vault containing precious metals beneath our cottage, it could account for the elevated levels of gold, silver, and other metals that the environmental assessment team had detected. What they had assumed was contamination might actually be evidence of the treasure that Dr. Whitfield was seeking. But I also recognized the potential complications that such a discovery could create. Dr. Whitfield, if we do find this missing Federal Reserve shipment, who would actually own it? And what would it mean for our ability to continue living in the cottage? "Those are excellent questions," she replied. "Under federal law and Vermont state statutes governing archaeological discoveries on private property, you would retain significant ownership rights to any artifacts discovered on your land. The Federal Reserve would likely want to negotiate a purchase agreement for any currency or bullion that could be definitively identified as part of their missing shipment, but they would be required to pay fair market value." She explained that similar cases had been resolved through agreements that provided substantial compensation to property owners, while allowing historical artifacts to be preserved and studied. In many instances, the property owners had received payments that far exceeded the actual value of the discovered materials, due to their historical significance and the publicity value of solving long-standing mysteries. "More importantly, for your immediate situation," Dr. Whitfield continued, "the federal grant I've secured includes provisions for emergency financial assistance to property owners who cooperate with historically significant investigations. If our preliminary survey indicates the presence of significant artifacts, you could qualify for immediate funding to address your current financial challenges while the full investigation proceeds." The prospect of immediate financial assistance was almost too good to believe. With Mom's medical bills mounting and our cottage threatened by environmental concerns, even modest emergency funding could provide the breathing room we desperately needed. "How much are we talking about for emergency assistance?" I asked, trying to manage my expectations while hoping for a miracle. "Typically between $15,000 and $50,000 depending on the significance of the preliminary findings. And if we do discover the missing Federal Reserve shipment, or even a substantial portion of it, you could be looking at compensation in the millions of dollars." Sophia and I exchanged glances, both recognizing that we had nothing to lose and potentially everything to gain by cooperating with Dr. Whitfield's investigation. Our situation was already desperate, and the possibility that our cottage contained hidden treasure seemed no more unlikely than any other solution to our mounting problems. "Dr. Whitfield, we'd like to proceed with your investigation," I said, making the decision that would lead to the most extraordinary discovery of our lives. "I can have my full team here by the end of the week," she replied, her excitement evident despite her professional demeanor. "I'll coordinate with the environmental assessment team to ensure our work doesn't interfere with their testing. In fact, our ground-penetrating radar might provide valuable information for their investigation as well."
Over the following days, Dr. Whitfield assembled a team of archaeologists, historians, and technical specialists who transformed our cottage property into a sophisticated research site. The equipment they brought was impressive. Multiple ground-penetrating radar units, metal detection systems, soil analysis tools, and computer systems that could create detailed three-dimensional maps of subsurface structures. The team worked with remarkable efficiency, establishing a grid pattern around the cottage and systematically scanning every square foot of the surrounding area. The process was fascinating to watch, as computer screens displayed real-time images of soil density variations, metal objects, and structural anomalies buried far below the surface. "What you're seeing here," Dr. Whitfield explained as we watched the radar operators work, "are density variations that indicate the presence of non-natural structures and materials. This rectangular pattern suggests a large chamber approximately 20 feet below the current foundation of your cottage. The dimensions and positioning are consistent with a vault or storage facility that was constructed during the original building phase." The images on the computer screen were difficult for Sophia and me to interpret, but Dr. Whitfield and her team were clearly seeing patterns that excited them enormously. They spent 3 days mapping the area around and beneath the cottage, discovering what appeared to be an extensive underground chamber system that had been expertly concealed for over 50 years. "This is extraordinary," announced Dr. Rebecca Torres, a specialist in historical archaeology from the University of Vermont. "The underground structures are clearly artificial, and the radar is detecting massive amounts of metal objects within the chambers. The configuration suggests that someone invested enormous resources in creating a sophisticated storage facility that was designed to remain hidden indefinitely." The radar mapping revealed what appeared to be a hidden entrance to the underground chambers, concealed behind a false wall in what we had assumed was a solid stone foundation. Most intriguingly, the scans showed that the chambers contained organized rows of objects that were consistent with stored containers or boxes, exactly what would be expected if someone had hidden a large shipment of precious metals and currency. Based on the radar images and the historical evidence, Dr. Whitfield said, studying the detailed computer maps of our property, "I believe we've located the missing Federal Reserve shipment that disappeared in 1968. The underground facility appears to contain the original storage containers, which would mean that everything has been preserved in its original condition for over 50 years. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Whitfield was correct, our cottage was sitting on top of one of the most significant treasure discoveries in American history. The gold and silver that had been hidden during the economic crisis of the 1960s had apparently been waiting beneath our feet throughout our months of financial struggle and near homelessness." But Dr. Whitfield cautioned us that accessing the underground chambers would require careful excavation and specialized equipment. "We need to locate the original entrance mechanism and ensure that we can open the chambers safely without damaging their contents or compromising their structural integrity. This is likely to be a delicate operation that could take several days or weeks." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The environmental assessment team had completed their preliminary testing and were waiting for laboratory results before proceeding to their next phase. Dr. Whitfield's investigation could proceed without interference, and the emergency funding she had mentioned was already being processed to help us address our immediate financial crisis. On March 30th, exactly a week after Dr. Whitfield's first phone call, she informed us that the preliminary investigation had qualified us for emergency financial assistance of $35,000 to help stabilize our situation while the full excavation proceeded. The check would be available within 48 hours, providing immediate relief from Mom's medical expenses and our mounting bills. But more importantly, she was confident that the full investigation would lead to the discovery that would transform our lives forever. The missing Federal Reserve shipment that had been hidden beneath our cottage for over 50 years was about to be revealed, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for those who are desperate enough and determined enough to dig deep enough to find them. As we prepared for the excavation that would uncover Theodore Blackthorne's greatest secret, Sophia and I finally dared to hope that our struggles were about to end and our real adventure was just beginning. The excavation began at dawn on April 8, 2025, with Dr. Whitfield's team assembling an array of specialized equipment that transformed our cottage into something resembling an archaeological expedition site. After 2 weeks of careful planning and obtaining the necessary permits, they were finally ready to access the hidden chambers that ground-penetrating radar had revealed beneath our foundation. The process of locating the original entrance mechanism proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Using the radar images as a guide, the team had identified what appeared to be a concealed doorway behind the eastern wall of our cottage basement area. But first, they needed to carefully remove sections of the stone foundation to expose the mechanism that Theodore Blackthorne had so expertly hidden over 50 years ago.
"We're proceeding with extreme caution," explained Dr. Marcus Chen, a structural engineer who had been brought in to ensure the excavation didn't compromise the cottage's foundation. The original builders clearly intended this entrance to remain hidden indefinitely. They used sophisticated engineering techniques that are impressive even by today's standards. Sophia watched every aspect of the excavation process with intense fascination, documenting each step with photographs and detailed notes for what was becoming her senior history project. Her teacher, Mr. Hartwell, had given her permission to miss classes for the remainder of the week, recognizing that she was witnessing history in the making. "Mom, look at this craftsmanship," she said, pointing to the precisely fitted stones that the team was carefully removing. "These aren't just random rocks. Each piece was individually shaped and positioned to create a wall that looks completely natural, but actually conceals a sophisticated mechanical system." The hidden entrance mechanism, when finally revealed, was a masterpiece of covert engineering. Behind what appeared to be a solid stone wall was an intricate system of counterweights and levers that could slide massive stone blocks out of the way to reveal a staircase leading down into darkness. The system had been designed to operate silently and leave no external evidence of its existence when closed. "This is extraordinary work," Dr. Whitfield observed, as her team carefully photographed and documented each container before attempting to examine their contents. Theodore Blackthorne either had access to extremely skilled craftsmen or possessed engineering knowledge that was far beyond what we would expect from a simple import-export businessman. The first attempt to open the hidden entrance failed when corrosion and decades of disuse had seized some of the mechanical components. The team spent an entire day carefully cleaning and lubricating the system, using techniques borrowed from museum conservation specialists to restore functionality without damaging the historical integrity of the mechanism. On April 10th at 2:47 p.m., the hidden entrance opened for the first time since Theodore Blackthorne had sealed it in 1969. As the massive stone blocks slowly slid aside with barely a whisper of sound, they revealed a narrow stone staircase descending into a subterranean chamber that had been waiting over half a century to reveal its secrets. Dr. Whitfield was the first to descend the staircase, wearing a headlamp and carrying sophisticated air quality monitoring equipment to ensure the underground space was safe for human entry. Her voice echoed up from the darkness with barely contained excitement. "Isabella, Sophia, you need to see this immediately. What we've discovered down here is beyond anything I imagined possible." The hidden chamber was far more extensive than the radar imaging had suggested. What appeared to be a single room was actually a complex of interconnected spaces that had been carved directly from the living rock beneath our cottage. The main chamber was approximately 30 feet long and 20 feet wide, with an arched stone ceiling that demonstrated the same expert craftsmanship evident in the entrance mechanism. But it was the contents of the chamber that left us speechless. Arranged in precise rows along the walls were dozens of heavy metal containers, each one bearing the official seals and markings of the Federal Reserve Bank. Wooden crates stamped with Treasury Department logos were stacked in orderly formations, their contents protected by waterproof wrapping that had preserved them in pristine condition. Most remarkably, the center of the chamber contained a massive steel vault that appeared to be completely intact,
its combination lock mechanism still functional after decades in storage. "This is the missing Federal Reserve shipment," Dr. Whitfield announced, her voice trembling with the magnitude of the discovery. "Based on the markings and serial numbers visible on these containers, this appears to be the complete shipment that disappeared in 1968, stored exactly as it was originally packed for transport." The preliminary inventory was staggering. The metal containers alone numbered 47, each one weighing approximately 200 pounds and bearing official Treasury Department documentation. If these containers held their original contents, they would contain thousands of gold coins and silver bars worth millions of dollars, even at 1968 prices. But Dr. Rebecca Torres, who was cataloging the Treasury markings, made an even more significant discovery as she examined the documentation attached to each container. "These aren't just standard bullion shipments," she announced. "According to these manifests, this collection includes rare gold coins, silver certificates, and bearer bonds that were being transferred as part of an emergency monetary stabilization program." The historical significance of what we had discovered was becoming clear as Dr. Whitfield's team carefully photographed and documented each container before attempting to examine their contents. This wasn't simply a case of stolen precious metals. This was a time capsule containing financial instruments and monetary reserves that provided unprecedented insight into the federal government's secret preparations for a potential economic collapse during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. "The documentation suggests that this shipment was deliberately hidden as part of a classified Treasury Department operation," Dr. Whitfield explained, as we stood in the underground chamber surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy that had remained secret for over 50 years.
The chamber contained additional evidence that supported this theory. In a smaller side room, the team discovered filing cabinets containing correspondence between Theodore Blackthorne and high-ranking Treasury Department officials, detailed plans for the underground facility, and instructions for maintaining the hidden storage system until it could be safely retrieved. Most remarkably, they found Theodore's personal journal, which documented the entire operation from his perspective and explained why the shipment had never been recovered. According to his final entries, the Treasury Department officials who had authorized the operation were transferred to other positions or retired before the monetary crisis stabilized, leaving no one in the federal bureaucracy who knew about the hidden cash or had authority to retrieve it. Emergency protocols require that this facility remains sealed until direct authorization is received from Treasury Department officials with appropriate clearance levels, Dr. Whitfield read from Theodore's journal. "All contact with my authorized representatives was terminated in October 1969. I am maintaining security protocols until proper authorization can be reestablished, regardless of the personal cost of continued isolation." The personal cost had apparently been enormous. Theodore's journal revealed that maintaining the secret had required him to abandon his business, his social connections, and eventually his cottage, all to protect a federal operation that the government itself had apparently forgotten. He had died in 1987, taking the secret with him and leaving the treasure to wait for someone else to discover it. The process of opening the main vault required additional expertise and specialized equipment. Dr. Whitfield contacted federal authorities to ensure that proper protocols were followed, but she also secured legal documentation establishing our rights as property owners to any discoveries made on our land. Under Vermont state law and federal statutes governing archaeological discoveries on private property, you retain ownership rights to these artifacts, explained Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in treasure law who had been brought in to protect our interests. However, given the historical significance and federal origin of these materials, we'll need to negotiate carefully with Treasury Department officials to ensure you receive fair compensation. On April 15th, federal representatives arrived to witness the opening of the main vault and provide official authentication of the discovered materials. The team included Treasury Department historians, Federal Reserve officials, and representatives from the National Archives who would document the discovery for historical preservation. The main vault contained the most valuable portion of the hidden shipment. Row upon row of gold bars gleamed in the artificial light, their surfaces still bright after decades in storage. Rare gold coins, including some specimens that were among the last minted before the United States abandoned the gold standard, were arranged in specially designed containers that had protected them from any deterioration. The preliminary count indicates approximately 4,200 gold coins and 847 gold bars, with a total weight of roughly 2,800 pounds of pure gold, announced Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the Treasury Department specialist in precious metals authentication. At current market prices, the gold content alone represents a value of approximately $23.7 million, but the true value of the discovery extended far beyond the precious metals. The bearer bonds and financial certificates included in the shipment had continued to accrue value over the 57 years they had been hidden. Some of these instruments, particularly the long-term treasury bonds, had grown to be worth several times their original face value. These aren't just historical curiosities, explained Dr. Michael Foster, a financial historian from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Many of these instruments are still legally valid and have continued earning interest throughout the period they were hidden. The total value of the financial instruments could exceed the value of the precious metals themselves. The initial assessment indicated that our discovery was worth approximately $47 million in precious metals, bearer bonds, and rare financial instruments. But the Treasury Department was prepared to offer additional compensation for the historical significance of the find and our cooperation in preserving the materials for research and education. This discovery provides unprecedented insight into federal monetary policy during one of the most critical periods in American economic history. The Treasury Department is prepared to offer a premium of $8 million above the intrinsic value of the materials in exchange for donation of representative samples to the National Archives and cooperation with our historical research efforts. The final settlement negotiations took 3 weeks, during which time Attorney Walsh worked tirelessly to ensure that our family received the maximum possible compensation while preserving the historical integrity of the discovery. The Treasury Department's final offer was extraordinary. $55 million for the complete collection, plus an additional $2 million for establishment of an educational foundation that would preserve the cottage and its underground chambers as a historical site. But perhaps more importantly for our immediate situation, the federal agencies involved in the authentication process had agreed to provide emergency funding to address our family's crisis while the settlement was being finalized. The $35,000 we had already received was supplemented by an additional $75,000 to cover Mom's medical expenses and ensure that we could maintain ownership of the cottage throughout the settlement process.
The transformation of our financial situation was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours of the final settlement agreement, we had gone from facing homelessness and bankruptcy to possessing resources that would ensure our family's security for generations to come. Mom's medical care became a non-issue overnight. We were able to transfer her to the finest rehabilitation facility in New England, where specialists developed a comprehensive treatment plan that dramatically accelerated her recovery. The stress that had been hindering her rehabilitation disappeared when she learned that her medical expenses would never again be a source of family anxiety. "Isabella, I can't believe this is really happening," she said, during one of my visits to her new facility, her speech already showing marked improvement thanks to intensive therapy. "After everything you and Sophia have been through, to have something this miraculous happen feels like a dream." The cottage itself was transformed from a source of anxiety into the foundation for our family's future. The environmental assessment that had threatened to force us from our home concluded that the elevated metal concentrations in our soil were indeed related to the hidden treasure rather than hazardous contamination. Our property was officially cleared for habitation, and the underground chambers were designated as historically significant sites worthy of preservation. Sophia's life changed in ways that went far beyond financial security. Her role in discovering the historical connections that led to the treasure had attracted attention from universities throughout New England. She received scholarship offers from Harvard, Yale, and MIT, all of them eager to support a student who had demonstrated such exceptional research abilities and analytical thinking. "Mom, I've decided I want to study both history and archaeology," she told me, as we sat in our restored cottage, surrounded by the books and research materials that had led to our incredible discovery. "I want to help other families discover the hidden stories in their own properties and communities." The educational foundation that we established with part of the settlement funds became a vehicle for sharing our story and supporting other families facing similar challenges. The Isabella and Sophia Rosewood Foundation for Historical Discovery provided grants for historical research,
emergency assistance for families in crisis, and educational programs that encouraged young people to explore the hidden stories in their own communities. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was the sense of security and possibility that now defined our daily lives. We were able to purchase the adjacent properties to ensure that our cottage would always be surrounded by protected land. We established a scholarship fund in Michael's memory that would help single-parent families afford college education for their children. The cottage that had represented desperation and uncertainty became a symbol of hope and perseverance. We converted part of the property into an educational center where visitors could learn about both the historical significance of our discovery and the broader stories of families who had overcome seemingly impossible challenges through determination and mutual support. Dr. Whitfield continued her research using our cottage as a base of operations, eventually discovering 2 additional sites where similar treasure caches had been hidden during the economic turmoil of the 1960s. Her work led to the recovery of millions of dollars worth of precious metals and historical artifacts, while providing new insights into the federal government's secret preparations for potential economic collapse. Your cottage has become the key to understanding an entire hidden chapter of American financial history, she told us during one of her regular visits. Theodore Blackthorne's sacrifice in protecting these materials has ultimately contributed far more to historical knowledge than he could ever have imagined. As I reflect on our journey from homelessness to security, from desperation to abundance, I'm struck by the parallels between our story and Theodore Blackthorne's experience. Both of our families faced impossible choices during periods of extreme crisis. Both made decisions that required enormous sacrifices with no guarantee of eventual reward. The difference is that we lived to see our courage vindicated and our perseverance rewarded. The cottage that Theodore had abandoned to protect a secret he couldn't reveal became the foundation for our family's transformation and the vehicle for preserving his legacy. On quiet evenings, when Sophia is working on her college applications and Mom is visiting from her nearby apartment where she lives independently again, I sometimes sit beside the hidden entrance to the chambers that changed our lives. The stone mechanism has been preserved exactly as Theodore designed it, a testament to the ingenuity and determination that can create lasting value even under the most challenging circumstances. The treasure that saved our family had been waiting beneath our feet throughout our months of struggle, ready to reward those who were curious enough to investigate its mysteries and determined enough to pursue its secrets despite overwhelming obstacles. Theodore Blackthorne's greatest gift wasn't the gold and silver he protected for over 50 years. It was the example he provided of how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they commit themselves to principles larger than their immediate comfort or convenience.
The cottage that we purchased as a desperate last resort proved to be the foundation for adventures and opportunities beyond anything we could have imagined. The resilience that sustained us through homelessness and financial crisis prepared us to handle the responsibilities and possibilities that came with sudden wealth. Most importantly, the experience taught us that the most valuable treasures are often hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for those who are brave enough to dig deep enough and persistent enough to keep searching, even when hope seems lost. Our story began with the simple decision to answer an unexpected phone call and accept an invitation to explore the hidden history of our property. Sometimes the greatest discoveries require nothing more than the willingness to believe that extraordinary possibilities can emerge from ordinary circumstances, and the determination to pursue those possibilities regardless of how unlikely they might initially appear. 3 years have passed since that extraordinary April morning when we first descended into Theodore Blackthorne's hidden chambers, and as I write this final chapter of our story, I'm sitting in the same cottage kitchen where Sophia and I once counted our last remaining dollars and wondered if we would have a home tomorrow. The transformation in our circumstances has been profound. But perhaps more importantly, we've learned that true wealth isn't measured only in financial terms, but in the opportunities we create for others and the legacy we choose to build.
The Isabella and Sophia Rosewood Foundation has grown far beyond anything we initially envisioned. What began as a simple gesture of gratitude has evolved into one of New England's most innovative organizations supporting families in crisis while promoting historical preservation and educational opportunity. Our foundation now operates programs in 12 states, has assisted over 3,000 families facing financial emergencies, and has funded historical research projects that have led to dozens of significant archaeological discoveries. The cottage itself has become a destination that attracts visitors from around the world. The Blackthorn Historical Education Center, which we established in the renovated barn and surrounding buildings, offers programs that combine American financial history, archaeological methodology, and family resilience stories. School groups arrive weekly for hands-on learning experiences that teach both historical research techniques and practical life skills for overcoming adversity. What makes this place special isn't just the treasure we discovered, Sophia explained to a group of middle school students during a recent tour. It's the story of how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up hope, even in the darkest circumstances. Sophia is now in her junior year at Harvard, pursuing a double major in history and archaeology with a minor in museum studies. Her undergraduate thesis, Hidden Treasures, Emergency Federal Operations During the 1960s Banking Crisis, has already attracted attention from academic publishers and government historians. More importantly, she's maintained her passion for helping families discover their own hidden stories and untapped resources. During school breaks, she returns to Vermont to work with foundation clients, using her research skills to help families investigate the histories of properties they've inherited, businesses they're trying to save, or communities they're working to revitalize. Her ability to uncover overlooked opportunities and forgotten resources has helped dozens of families discover assets they never knew they possessed. Every family has hidden treasures, she tells the people she works with. Sometimes it's literal treasure buried in the backyard. More often, it's unused intellectual property, overlooked legal rights, forgotten bank accounts, or simply skills and knowledge that can be monetized in ways people haven't considered. Last year, her research helped a struggling farm family in New Hampshire discover that their property contained a rare mineral deposit that allowed them to establish a profitable quarrying operation. Her work with an elderly woman in Maine revealed that a collection of seemingly worthless family letters included correspondence from famous authors that sold at auction for over $200,000. But perhaps her most meaningful project involved helping a single father in rural Connecticut whose family was facing foreclosure on their ancestral home. Sophia's historical research revealed that the property had been illegally seized from the family during the Great Depression, making them eligible for federal reparations that not only saved their home, but provided resources for the father to start a successful organic farming operation. The skills I learned researching Theodore Blackthorn and our cottage history apply to every family story. People often assume that their circumstances are hopeless because they can't see all the resources and opportunities that are actually available to them. Sometimes it just takes someone with research skills and historical perspective to uncover the possibilities that have been there all along. Mom has made a remarkable recovery from her stroke, though she continues to work with physical and speech therapists to maintain and improve her abilities. She's found new purpose as the Foundation's Community Outreach Coordinator, using her background as a librarian to help develop educational programs and resource guides for families facing medical or financial crises. Her background as a librarian also makes her a natural choice for coordinating our educational outreach efforts. She knows the power of knowledge and research to open doors and create opportunities, even in the most challenging circumstances.
She's particularly passionate about supporting other stroke survivors and their families, having established a program that provides both emergency financial assistance and long-term planning services for families dealing with sudden medical disabilities. The program has helped over 400 families navigate the complex challenges of medical recovery while maintaining financial stability. The cottage property itself has been expanded to include several additional buildings that house our foundation offices, research facilities, and guest accommodations for visiting scholars and program participants. We've preserved Theodore Blackthorne's underground chambers exactly as we found them, creating a museum-quality exhibit that tells the complete story of the emergency federal operations during the 1960s banking crisis. The chambers now include interactive displays that explain both the historical context of Theodore's work and the archaeological methods that led to our discovery. Visitors can experience replicas of the hidden entrance mechanism and explore detailed recreations of the underground storage areas while learning about the broader themes of financial preparedness, government contingency planning, and individual sacrifice for national security. Dr. Eleanor Whitfield has become not just a colleague, but a close family friend, continuing her research using our cottage as a base of operations. Her work has expanded to include investigation of similar emergency storage sites throughout New England, and she's documented evidence of an extensive network of hidden federal facilities that were created during the economic uncertainties of the 1960s and 1970s. Your discovery opened the door to understanding an entire hidden chapter of American preparedness efforts, she told us during a recent visit. We've now identified 12 additional sites where similar operations may have been conducted, and our research has contributed to historical scholarship that's changing how we understand federal economic policy during that crucial period. Her ongoing work has led to the recovery of additional treasure caches worth millions of dollars, all of which have been properly documented and preserved for historical research while providing compensation to the property owners who cooperated with the investigations. The model we established at our cottage has become the standard for balancing private property rights with historical preservation and public education. One of the most rewarding aspects of our foundation's work has been the scholarship program we established in Michael's memory. The Michael Rosewood Memorial Scholarships provide full college funding for children from single-parent families, with preference given to students who have demonstrated resilience in overcoming significant personal or family challenges. This year, we awarded scholarships to 24 students, including a young man whose family was homeless for 6 months after his father's job loss, a teenage girl who worked 3 part-time jobs to help support her disabled mother, and a student whose academic achievements flourished despite growing up in foster care after her parents' deaths in an automobile accident. These young people remind me of Sophia and myself during our darkest periods, I reflected during this year's scholarship awards ceremony. They've learned that circumstances don't define possibilities, and that determination combined with education can create opportunities that seemed impossible when they started their journeys. The financial security that our discovery provided has allowed us to take risks and pursue projects that would have been impossible when we were struggling for basic survival. But perhaps more importantly, the experience of going from desperation to abundance has given us perspective on what truly matters and what kinds of legacy we want to create. We've learned that money alone doesn't create happiness or security. What creates lasting satisfaction is the ability to use resources in ways that strengthen communities, support families facing challenges, and preserve important stories for future generations. The treasure that saved our family has become the foundation for helping thousands of other families discover their own hidden resources and untapped potential. The cottage that once represented our last desperate hope has become a symbol of transformation and possibility. Families from across the country visit to attend our workshops on financial preparedness, historical research methods, and resilience building strategies. Many of them arrive facing circumstances similar to what Sophia and I experienced, and they leave with both practical tools and renewed hope for their futures. One of our most popular programs is the Family Treasure Hunt Workshop, where participants learn to research their own family histories, investigate properties they own or are considering purchasing, and identify overlooked assets or opportunities that could improve their circumstances. The workshop combines practical skills like property research and genealogical investigation with broader lessons about persistence, creative problem-solving, and community support. Every family has untold stories and unexplored possibilities, we tell workshop participants. Your job isn't to find literal buried treasure, though that occasionally happens. Your job is to approach your circumstances with curiosity, determination, and openness to discoveries that might change everything you thought you knew about your options. Many workshop graduates have gone on to make remarkable discoveries. A family from Ohio found oil deposits on property they inherited from grandparents. A couple from Maine discovered that their small farm was sitting on one of the largest known deposits of rare minerals in New England. A widow from New Hampshire learned that her late husband's hobby collection of comic books included several issues now worth over $50,000 each.
Our cottage looked like a disaster when we first bought it. Our financial situation seemed hopeless when we were sleeping in our car. My mother's stroke appeared to represent an insurmountable challenge. The environmental investigation felt like a threat that could destroy everything we had worked to rebuild. But each of these apparent disasters contained seeds of transformation that became visible only when we approached them with openness to unexpected possibilities and willingness to accept help from people with expertise we lacked. The treasure that saved our family had been waiting beneath our feet for over 50 years, but it required the right combination of circumstances, knowledge, and determination to bring it into the light. Theodore Blackthorne's sacrifice in protecting those assets created the opportunity for our discovery, but we had to be prepared to recognize and pursue that opportunity when it appeared. Today, as Sophia prepares for graduate school and plans her career in historical archaeology, as my mother continues her recovery and expands her work with stroke survivors, and as our foundation touches the lives of thousands of families each year, I'm grateful for every challenge we faced during our journey from desperation to abundance. Those challenges taught us resilience, compassion, and humility that no amount of wealth could have provided. They prepared us to handle sudden fortune responsibly and to use our resources in ways that create lasting value for others. The cottage that was once our last desperate hope has become the foundation for adventures and opportunities that extend far beyond anything we could have imagined. But more importantly, it has become a symbol of the truth that sustains our work, that every family possesses hidden resources and untapped potential, waiting for the right combination of determination, curiosity, and community support to transform possibility into reality. Our story began with a simple decision to answer an unexpected phone call and investigate the mysterious history of our property. It continues with our commitment to help other families discover their own hidden treasures and write their own stories of transformation. Sometimes, the greatest adventures begin with the smallest steps, and the most valuable discoveries are waiting in the most unlikely places.